This week on Act Out, how the lie of a struggling school district drove LA teachers to strike, and the larger fight for public school funding versus charter school elitism that these actions highlight. Next, in the forests of British Columbia, sovereign Indigenous clans continue a decade-long shutdown of dirty energy projects. And finally, Chris Garaffa joins us to talk tech. Suggestion, leave your phone in the other room. It won't want to hear this. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So, as of the taping of this show, the LA teachers' strike is on to its second week. Last Friday, teachers held a huge rally in Grand Park in downtown LA, where some 60,000 people showed up to show their support for the strike and the teachers. Over the weekend, bargaining continued, and mediator Mayor Eric Garcetti announced that meetings had been productive. But come Monday, the strike was still on and growing. Local union firefighters showed up at the strike line with food and support, and on Tuesday, 1,000+ firefighters marched in solidarity to the picket lines. And regardless of the latest updates that may have come between the filming of this show and when you're actually watching this, these details will be the same. LA teachers haven't been on strike since 1989. They've been in negotiations with LA Unified School District, or LAUSD, since April 2017. So patience is something that UTLA has in spades. Wages have stagnated despite a 27% increase in the cost of living. For almost the past year, teachers have worked without a contract. And yet their strike is about way more than just wages. UTLA, the teachers' union, their list of demands include smaller class size, a librarian in every school, a nurse in every school, an academic counselor in every school, and less standardized testing. Investigative journalist outlet Capital and Maine released a dollar amount rundown of these demands last week. And at first glance, it can seem like a hell of a lot of money. That is, however, until you realize that LAUSD sits on top of a reserve of at least $1.9 billion, a so-called rainy day fund that ironically wasn't tapped even as the teachers took to the streets during an unusual for LA torrential downpour. Still, according to Capital and Maine's dive into LAUSD's financials, they wouldn't even need to touch that rainy day fund in order to address the demands put forth by UTLA. Findings nearing the $1 billion price tag suggest that LAUSD is far from the financially distressed entity it claims to be. But even on a more conservative tip, adding up unrestricted additional revenues, which include extra money from the governor, and over projections on books and supplies, some $640 million more than covers UTLA's list of demands. To add insult to injury, LAUSD could have scored an extra $330 million last summer, but former investment banker turned school superintendent Austin Butner, yes, really, managed to swing votes his way, shooting down the potential monetary boost. And why? Why would the superintendent of a supposedly struggling school district, a former banker no less, want to turn down $330 million? Well, because that money would only be used for LA Unified, but not for the more than 200 charter schools within its boundaries. And so the penny, or many pennies, drop. While caps on charter schools are not listed among UTLA's demands, they are frequently mentioned on and off the picket line. For instance, this past weekend, UTLA noted on their Twitter that the district's claims of a fiscal crisis are a smokescreen to justify their agenda to disinvest in public education in favor of the greater expansion of unregulated corporate charters that don't serve all students. And that's a charter school in a gilded nutshell. Publicly funded but privately run, charter schools are the wet dream of folks who want the best but want other people to pay for it. While siphoning money from the public school system, they allow wealthier parents that buzzword ability of school choice, while leaving those who can't pay to fight over scraps. And from a worker's perspective, charter schools are not unionized, so they dampen the bargaining power of teachers overall. With perhaps a nod to this issue in particular, in a California first, some charter school teachers actually did join the strike this past week, showing solidarity with the larger goals of UTLA that affect the well-being of not only kids, but ultimately whole communities. This move, and indeed the strike in general, has brought the question of charter schools into the limelight. Putting it out there that a thriving public school system and a growing charter school system are in fact mutually exclusive. Profit motives poison any entity aimed at addressing public good, be it healthcare or education. When you put an investment banker at the helm of the second largest school district in the country, do you really think that class size or students' mental health will make a shit bit of difference? I mean, he's literally sitting on almost $2 billion, a full 2,533% over the statutory reserve of $75 million, not to mention the extra funding that recently came to light. And yet, he just can't, seem to find the cash to invest in LA kids. As Danny Feingold pointed out in a recent article on the strike, another important byproduct of the strike is a robust dialogue on how much we are willing to invest in public education. Critics of LAUSD have long focused on test scores and graduation rates, but have seldom been willing to address the fundamental issue of how limited financial resources affect student outcomes. For now, the most important question is not how long the strike will last, but how it can achieve the greatest good. Whether you're seeing this as the strike rages on, or whether you're seeing this a year after it's ended, I think that's a question every teachers union, every parent, every community needs to ask. And with that, consider the power of a resolute strike. On Wednesday, January 16th, the Vancouver City Council voted unanimously to declare a climate emergency, pushing city staff to research and institute new ways to reduce emissions, as well as set and reach climate targets. So put a pin in that good news, because while this was happening, protests around Canada raged on against a colonialist harbinger of climate catastrophe. The Trans-Canada Coastal Gas Link Pipeline, or CGL, is a proposed pipeline slated to run more than 670 kilometers, or roughly 415 miles, from the fracked gas fields in northeastern British Columbia to Kitimat, where a $40 billion LNG export facility will ship out Canada's gas reserves to, as we noted in last week's show, an increasingly unstable fossil fuel market. 5 multinationals with home bases in Korea, Holland, Malaysia, China, and Japan, not Canada, are hoping to cash in on both the pipeline and export facility. Prime Minister Trudeau has publicly backed the projects, calling the pipeline export facility duo the single largest private sector investment in Canadian history. At the same time, he's also thrown around a lot of reconciliation talk, which is the term given to the supposed efforts of the Canadian government to address colonial violence and give Indigenous peoples rights to self-governance. Indeed, not long ago, the very same Trudeau, who wet himself over the CGL pipeline, stated that we need to get to a place where Indigenous peoples in Canada are in control of their own destiny, making their own decisions about their future. Unfortunately, as is so often the case with political tongue-wagging, in the real world, you can't make nice with everyone. And recent events have shown that Trudeau is far more interested in making nice with big oil and gas than reconciling with Indigenous peoples. The epicenter of the fight against CGL is taking place outside of Houston in British Columbia, north of Vancouver, in the unceded traditional territories of the Wet'suwet'en clans. Unceded, as Judith Sayers of the Hupakaseth First Nation noted in an op-ed earlier this month, essentially breaks down like this. As with most lands in British Columbia, Aboriginal title exists on the Wet'suwet'en lands in question. And based on this title, they have the right to defend their lands from development that will adversely affect them. The Wet'suwet'en were never defeated in a war, never surrendered their lands, and never entered into a treaty. Therefore, the authority for the land lies with the hereditary chiefs, as opposed to the elected chief and councils, which have never been given jurisdiction to deal with the land. And it can get a little confusing here thanks to the Foucault trappings of colonialism, but the basic gist is that these so-called band councils, established under the Canadian Indian Act, signed an agreement with TransCanada as if they had jurisdiction over the land. Peter Grant, the Wet'suwet'en chief's lawyer, explained in a recent interview that after TransCanada was given a resounding no by the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, the Canadian government then proceeded to tell TransCanada to, go ahead and meet with a band council, which again, doesn't have jurisdiction over the lands or the authority to overturn decisions made by the Wet'suwet'en chiefs. The pipeline company proceeded to offer millions of dollars to the band council in exchange for an agreement on CGL. And this sort of bribery is commonplace across the oil and gas industry. Grossly underfunded and marginalized communities, in this case the band councils on struggling reserves, are offered the carrot of upfront cash with a lingering stick of a destroyed ecosystem and future. But again, the core issue here is that the band councils never had the legal right to make that call, a fact that is actually upheld in Canadian law itself. Wet'suwet'en chief's lawyer Grant also pointed out that in the 2004 Supreme Court case of Haida, a unanimous decision by the court stated that not only does the government have a duty to consult and accommodate Aboriginal communities, but industry, i.e. pipeline companies, must be willing to alter their plans or in some cases not proceed with their projects at all. But as police and special forces descended on Wet'suwet'en territories on Monday, January 7th, breaching the checkpoint and violently arresting 14 people, it was pretty clear that neither the Canadian government nor TransCanada had any interest in upholding Canadian law, or the federal and provincial 2016 adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Article 10 of the UNDRIP states that Indigenous peoples should not be forcibly removed from the lands in their territories. The RCMP removing the Wet'suwet'en obviously was a forced removal and in contravention of UNDRIP. Article 26 is one of the more important ones in the Declaration. This article states that Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources they have traditionally owned. It also says that states shall give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources. Article 18 talks of the right of Indigenous peoples to participate in decision-making in matters that would affect their rights, in accordance with their own procedures. Again, this did not happen. In short, any way you slice it, Canada is in the wrong, not just according to common sense and respect for human rights and environmental safety, but according to their own damn laws. Following the government attack, protests across the country intensified, from roadblocks in northern Canada to more than 2,000 marching in Toronto to a 6-hour-long occupation of a TransCanada pipeline facility in Hamilton. Last week, more solidarity actions were taken around Canada and in the U.S. For instance, last Monday, water protectors from the L'Eau-et-la-Vie Bayou Bridge Pipeline Resistance Camp protested at TransCanada's offices in Houston, and on Wednesday, held space outside of TransCanada board member Randy Limbacher's house in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people. And late last week, as CGL workers forced their way into Unist'ot'en camp, escorted by RCMP, disrupting a day of mourning, folks made it clear that they are not giving up, not conceding or bending to the will of this pipeline. Building off of years of resistance, the hereditary chiefs remain resolute. Hereditary Chief Namox noted on the evening of the January 7th arrests that we will never give up our rights, title, jurisdiction, or authority to any form of government. Recent years prove that neither he nor his people make that statement lightly. Since 2007, the Wet'suwet'en have been saying no to development in their traditional territories, battling such behemoths as Enbridge, which is the company behind the much-contested and hated Line 3 pipeline here in the States. The Unist'ot'en camp was established in 2010 when Frida Hewson took up residence there and started fundraising in order to build the Unist'ot'en Healing Center, so that folks native to that land could reconnect with their heritage and address intergenerational trauma that has led to emotional, physical, and mental pain and abuse. A road checkpoint made it clear that no one could access the land without consent, and that the Unist'ot'en would stand against any pipelines attempting to cross and destroy their land, water, and air. 10 years later, they're still holding off construction. And their battle not only represents the growing movement for Indigenous rights, but the understanding that the ills of a colonial capitalism have brought us to the precipice of our own extinction. For the sake of human rights, and in fact a future where humans can actually survive, we have to be very clear on recognizing Indigenous rights and thereby Indigenous perspectives on sustainability and ecology. And when I say we, I mean you and me, because our governments, be they headed by a GQ neoliberal or a dim-witted troll, will not take the initiative to steer us away from the abyss. A new study released by Oil Change International and 17 partner organizations found that between 2018 and 2050, U.S. drilling into new oil and gas reserves could unlock 120 billion metric tons of new carbon pollution, equivalent to the lifetime CO2 emissions of nearly 1,000 coal-fired power plants. Based on industry research, expansion will rely heavily, as in 90%, on fracking, focusing in on areas already known to be hotspots: Texas, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. Needless to say, these new projects will be catastrophic if allowed to move ahead. Any chance at mitigating global climate change would be effectively destroyed, even if the rest of the world switched over to green energy tomorrow, leaving the U.S. to walk this path alone. As I noted in episode 189, where I covered the COP24 summit, the fucked up fact of the matter is that big players like the US, Russia, China, and even Canada have the power to single-handedly ruin humanity's chances at survival simply by carrying on with our respective status quos. And this is not to say that we should throw in the towel. Quite the opposite. Indeed, this should invigorate our fight with a truly existential weight. As children of this empire, we quite literally owe it to humanity to not accept the trajectory of our government's policy. And that can feel heavy as hell if we feel alone in this fight. But we're not. Just look at Vancouver. We can do the same in our hometowns and ripple change outwards, always thinking globally as we appreciate our strength and the power of our solidarity. Indeed, the solidarity we build between the Bayous and the Unist'ot'en people, between folks blocking pipelines in Appalachia to those shutting down coal mines in Germany. This can topple colonial capitalism. But it will require more than a repost here and there, more than a thumbs up or a $5 donation. It'll require getting dirty, revising and devising tactics, being uncomfortable and getting real about the crises we face. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. As Karl Marx wrote, from each according to his ability. We must all ask what we're able to do, really able to do. Go to a camp and support in person, block a project physically, provide services for those on the front lines, jail support, legal expertise, food, shelter. You get the idea. They say that power concedes nothing. Well, we are the power. And drawing that red line means that we will not concede anything beyond that point. Not one more pipeline. Not one more coal plant. Truly, the only question that remains is, can we acknowledge and take hold of that power before that red line is irreparably crossed? For more on Unist'ot'en Camp, visit Unist'ot'en.camp. Now, moving on, we've reached a frightening level of comfortable surveillance, as in we're eerily comfortable with the fact that we're constantly being monitored. And I mean that in as Orwellian a way as it comes across. Literally and figuratively speaking, our digital gadgets monitor just about everything about us, from our heart rate to our sex lives, and store that information for much more than our personal use. Indeed, these apps and programs are less a self-help tool and more of a bridge between the commodification of self and far overreaching government surveillance. Here to talk more about the all-seeing apps, how to combat the state's panopticon, and more is web developer and technologist Garaffa. Take a look.
So the Facebook app itself collects a whole lot of information about you. It knows where you are, it knows who your friends are. It can figure out who's near you by figuring out where you are when you're using the app, and then figuring out who else is in your general area using the app. It knows obviously which events you've gone to and what events other people have gone to. And they use that for like the people you might know feature, where it's like weird how all those people you never really talked to are showing up in your feed already, right? But it's a little more sinister than that too, because Facebook is actually tracking you all over the internet too, right? So all these sites that have that little Facebook share button, they actually are adding code that your phone or your computer is running and sending information back to Facebook. And if you've also logged into Facebook from that same device, they can associate that with your Facebook account. So what they do is Facebook collects all of this information. They package it up and they say to advertisers, hey, you can target people down to people who are interested in these topics. It doesn't have to be that you said you were interested. It's just that you went to maybe some events, right, that were on that topic, or you like certain pages about that topic. It could be technology, it could be cars, it could be politics, it could be, anything. And then the advertisers can target you based on that. The thing with that is, once you've seen that advertisement, advertisers can also set up a unique tracking, identity for you and see where else you go on the internet. So if they have an ad on another page on the internet, they can actually use that information that they got from Facebook to then go back to you and figure out who you are, down to, sometimes down to actually your identity, your personal identity.
And what's scary about this is that it goes beyond even Facebook, of course. A Vice report came out in early January, which is headlined, "I gave a bounty hunter $300, then he located our phone." T-Mobile, Sprint, and AT&T are selling access to their customers' location data, and that data is ending up in the hands of bounty hunters and others not authorized to possess it. So basically this idea that private individuals and businesses are selling and trading in your private information.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, your cell phone company has to know where you are, or where your phone is, right? That's how it works. It goes off that tower, it gets to your phone. You want to have the closest tower to you sending a signal to your phone so that like your internet connection works or your voice call doesn't drop. So that it has, they have to know that. The problem is that they are selling this information to private agencies, and they can use that to, in this case, it was a bounty hunter, but they also are selling it to advertising firms. And I think this is a great article, and I think people should go read it. Joseph Cox, who's the researcher behind it, and the journalist, did a lot of really great a lot of great work doing this and also explaining how this works. So yeah, they actually are selling this information to private companies. And then what's worse than that is they can sell it to private companies who then resell it. They repackage it, they resell it, and they bundle it up. And you don't know, even if you know who the first company in that chain is, you don't know who the second, third, or fourth are. And so effectively, anyone who has your cell phone number could potentially find out where you are right now or where you were at any given point in the past.
In terms of, apps on your phone, you mentioned Facebook. Is there a way to know, or should we just assume it's all of them? Like, which apps they are? I know recently there was this not funny really, but kind of odd thing that happened where soldiers were using the Fitbit tracker on their base, and so they basically gave the outline of the entire supposedly secret base just by using a Fitbit. Is there a way to easily tell which apps are creeping on us, or should we just assume that every time we leave the house with one of these, that all of the apps are creeping on us?
Yeah, I would just assume that any app you open can and probably will figure out where you are. Even if you turn off location services, just based on the way the internet works, you have what's called an IP address. It just identifies your device, and that's how the stuff gets sent to your phone or your computer, and how that you send stuff, information back to Facebook or whoever, right? And you can generally identify where somebody is down to the city, sometimes the neighborhood, by that IP address. There was just a lawsuit filed this week, actually, against IBM of all companies. I didn't know this until this week. IBM owns the Weather Channel app. They actually, yeah, exactly. Like I had no idea, right? But California is suing IBM because the Weather Channel app, which you kind of need to give it your location to know what the weather is by you. You'd figure that. They were also sending your location to advertisers, and they weren't giving any idea. They were not saying this anywhere in their terms of service, anywhere in the app. So even in instances where you need to give them your location, I think of a situation like Uber or Lyft. You need to give them your location, but you don't know what they're doing with it afterwards. So I would assume if you're out with a smartphone, assume that any app you have is going to do something with your location, even at the least just have it and know where you are.
So you mentioned California suing IBM because of this issue. Are there other, you mentioned there's no real legal framework about this because of the unfortunate and inherent way that these things work. So what would be the legal grounds for that sort of case? And do you think that we'd see more of these cases moving forward?
I think just because of how much attention all of this kind of stuff has gotten, the Facebook leaks, all of this privacy violations, I'm thinking about like Equifax breaches and all of that. We're going to see more lawsuits against this. Some of it is going to be just basic contract law, where like you didn't say you were doing this with my information. And this is really where it comes down to, right? Our information, our just data that we provide by existing is being commoditized. It is, we are the product at this point. Even now when we pay for the service, we are still the product. And so when we are providing all of this profit-making material, historically, that's just been labor, right? Labor has been what has created wealth. And now it's just our basic existence is creating wealth. Just, where we are, who we're talking to, and all of that.
For our complete interview with Chris, including a discussion on knowing your rights with regards to digital devices, check out our podcast, which airs every Friday on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Libsyn. And to find out more about Chris and his work, visit his website at Garaffa.com. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thanks so much for watching. As usual, please spread this as far and wide as you can, and check out that last slide to see the sites that I've mentioned in this week's show, because there's some interesting spellings there that you'll want to reference in order to get to the right place. And in order to stay up to date on this show, the work that we do, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter at the link below and in the show description. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out.
And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch. We got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and set my shove. I'm not a fighter.